What up, guys? Bench Buddies are back with our 2025 ACC preseason overview. As always, I got Ty joining me here. We're going to go team by team, break this whole conference down, every single win, every single loss. Then there's going to be asterisks next to the teams who we have making the conference championship. And we'll kick it off going in alphabetical order. We both got Boston College hitting their under in wins this year and 4-8. Almost we have them exactly the same schedule wise. It's just a rough end to their season because I think a lot of those teams in the back half are going to be hitting their stride at that point. And unfortunately, this Boston College team, I just don't see them contending. I know that they're a decent team in the ACC, but if they went 7-6 last year in a down year, I think this year is a little better conference wise. So I think that they take a step back here.
Yeah, I'd say probably the part I hate the most about these super conferences now is the disparity in the schedules. And you see that here, Boston College really getting the short end of the stick here with their ACC schedule and having to go to Michigan State and host Notre Dame in the non-conference. Both of those I have as losses. So schedule's not doing them any favors, and they lost their quarterback from last year. So I think it's going to be a rough go of it this year.
Yeah, they're moving to another team that we both have going 4-8, but just different wins and losses on the board. I have them starting off hot, the California Golden Bears, and then once they hit conference play, that's when it goes downhill. Kind of same thing. I mean, that at Stanford game, I think that that's going to be a coin flip at the end of the year for these two teams because it'll be kind of bottom of the barrel. Um, and their kind of schedule in the middle of the year, I think, is kind of where they're going to have trouble and kind of fizzle out towards the end, just because there's a lot of hype there around that UNC program. Bill Belichick on the road at Virginia Tech. Good luck. When they're semi decent, good luck. And I really just don't see this team competing. You can see there only 7 returning starters. Recruiting, not even in the top 50. So just another down year, I think, for California.
Yeah, I mean, they got cleaned out in the transfer portal and they did not recruit well. So, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster right there. I went back and forth on that Minnesota game. I actually have them winning that at home, but just, having a rough go of it in conference play. And I think they hit their under as well.
And then moving to a team that there's a lot of green on this screen, meaning that this team is going to do very well this year, and that's the Clemson Tigers. We're going to talk about it. The defense is going to win this team, I think, a lot more games than people are going to realize. I know the offense is going to be really good under Cade Klubnik, but I have them beating LSU, so there's a little preview for our SEC. And I think they roll until they go into Georgia Tech, a conference game, week 3. I think that's their toughest game on the schedule this year. Maybe that South Carolina game at the end of the year, depending on how they fare in the SEC. But Georgia Tech, I think, is a really good team to me that I think is going to shock Clemson in week 3, probably be the biggest upset of the week. Then put a lot of tension on Georgia Tech. But this video isn't about Georgia Tech. It's about Clemson. Regardless, they're still going to get to that ACC championship. And that's because they have 16 returning starters. 16 in today's college football is pretty much unheard of. If you get half your team back for the next year, I would chalk that up as a massive win. Obviously, the Dabo way, I think, is going to come to fruition here. And he's going to get to the ACC championship game. And I don't know. It just, if not now, it's one of those teams where if not now, when is it going to happen again? Because if he wants to keep that dynasty window open, I guess you could say, has been a few years removed now. He wants to keep that window open. It's got to be this year because this is probably the most talented team he's had since he's won a national championship.
But I do have Clemson going 12-0. I think they have the fewest question marks of any team in the country this year. I think they have the best defense in the country, and they have a first or second round quarterback returning. They have everything you could ask for going into a season. And I think they beat LSU in week 1. And after that, it should be pretty smooth sailing. I have them beating South Carolina to finish the season. And I think they go 12-0. I think they'll have a couple close calls along the way, but
Mhm.
this program gets the benefit of the doubt for me because they've won so much in the last decade, and they still have the same coach, and they have so many returning starters that I think they'll get it done and go undefeated.
Yeah, I will say the one thing, if there is a loss, if they do lose, who's the team they lose to?
I think it's probably South Carolina in week in week 13. I think that rivalry has kind of nipped them in the last few years. South Carolina's kind of had their number. And even when Clemson was first starting this dynasty under Dabo, they could not get over the South Carolina hump for a few years. So I guess if there's one they're going to drop, I would go with that one.
Okay. And then we'll go from that to kind of middle of the pack here in ACC play. I think Duke's going to be all right, kind of same boat as they were last year. Start really well. I think that game at Tulane is going to be a huge win in my eyes for them because I think Tulane's going to be probably around 9-3 at the end of the year. But going to Syracuse, going to Clemson, going to North Carolina at the end of the year, I think those are games that they just unfortunately drop. Then that Wake Forest game, if they have a shot to get into the conference championship, I think with three losses at that point, I think they're kind of already out of it. And I think they unfortunately lose on senior night to Wake Forest.
Yeah, tough schedule for them as well. I think that Illinois at home and then going to Tulane back to back, that's pretty tough for a non-conference schedule. And then, having to go to Syracuse, go to Clemson, go to North Carolina. Schedule didn't do them a lot of favors this year either. So I think they're probably a little better than their 6-6 record, but sometimes that's just how the schedule shakes out. But I do think Manny Diaz is going to have this program competing in the ACC.
Yeah, they're moving to Florida State. Obviously, they're probably the biggest storyline outside of Miami coming in this year because of how awful it was last year. Um, and who do you get week one? Oh, you get Alabama at home. And I mean, if they win that game, I know a Florida State guy, and he's like, if we win that game, I just hope it isn't the Super Bowl of our year in week one, which is totally justifiable because if you win that game, let's say, then you're like, oh, we're back. We're going to be really good. And then who knows? You lose to Virginia on the road, and then the whole season tanks. So I think it would honestly be better. It might be crazy to say to lose that game to Alabama because then you're like, oh, well, if we played competitive, hang around, gives you some hope. You should coast through the next three until you get Miami in week five. And I think that's going to be the tall tale of the season. If they can win that game somehow at home, then this Florida State team might be making the playoff. Now, obviously, I have them losing. I think 7-5 is a very realistic goal. Obviously, like you said, Boston College losing their quarterback. He goes to Florida State, Thomas Castellanos, and I think he's going to be a little better than DJU, but I'm not saying he's going to be the guy that turns his program back to 10-2. But I think it's a step in the right direction. As you can see, obviously, only six returning starters from that miserable team last year. Maybe they needed to clean house.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Only six starters coming back, but that might be a good thing when you only won two games last year. I obviously think they dropped the Alabama game, but I think they bounced back this year. I think there's still a lot of talent, and for them, they got a pretty favorable schedule here in the ACC. I do think they'll find their way past East Texas A&M, whoever that is. So I think 8-4 is definitely realistic once you start going game by game. A lot of their tough ACC games are at home. I don't see them winning any of their top 10 matchups, which are Alabama, Miami, and Clemson. I think the Florida game could end up being a bit of a coin flip, but just with that being at the Swamp, I think they dropped that one. But I think Florida State fans would probably take 8-4 this year, coming off a 2-10 campaign, which would build some momentum towards 2026.
Yeah, and talking about my sleeper team in the ACC, if there's any team to surprise some people, I think you're the same way. We're both going with Georgia Tech here. Now, I have them beating Clemson in week three. Obviously, they're one of my losses for Clemson, and I think they get on a roll, but then go to Duke and Manny Diaz just somehow finds a way to beat this team. They respond, beating Syracuse at home, and then go to NC State and lose another, unfortunately, heartbreaker. And I think that's where this team kind of suffers in not getting to the conference championship or into the playoff, just because just the experiences there, their offense on offense at least, the returning starters, they've recruited well. But I think that game at Georgia at the end of the year, I think that's just what looms large. Now, don't get me wrong, this team competed with Georgia for seven overtimes last year and almost won that game. And this year it's at home. So maybe they do win that game. They go 10-2. This team's probably in the playoff, even if they lose to Duke and NC State. So if you can beat Georgia, I mean, how we have it predicted in our upcoming videos, if they somehow flip the script there and win that, I don't see how Georgia Tech doesn't make the playoff, even if they don't get in their conference. So Haynes King and company, that schedule is very favorable. I'm sure you were going to mention that. Besides that Georgia game and the Clemson game, I can really see them going 10-2.
Yeah, I mean, having both of those games, but not having to play them on the road is definitely a big opportunity. They kind of got screwed. I found this out the other day. The Georgia game is in Atlanta this year at Mercedes-Benz. So Georgia gets taken to 8 overtimes last year, and then all of a sudden the game's at a neutral site the next year. I think that's kind of interesting. Maybe Kirby Smart had something to do with that. But nonetheless, they don't have to go on the road for either of those games. So if they could pull one of those off, I have them losing to Duke, but if they could get out of there with a win, you're looking at 11-1. So it's the dream is definitely there for Georgia Tech. It's possible. Colorado week one going on the road for that game is going to be a big tell for how the season's going to go. I think they scrape out a win there and have a very solid season in the ACC.
I will say, just to let you know, the Georgia Tech campus is in Atlanta, so it is still technically a
That
home.
is true.
So like technically a home game, but it's not on campus. But just wanted to put that out there. And then Louisville, I think they're going to be kind of the same boat as Georgia Tech. This team last year exceeded expectations. I can kind of see them being around where they were. I think 8-4 is more realistic, but I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt of what I saw last year. Um, it's not going to be enough. They didn't recruit well. They didn't retain a lot, but I think they got a good head coach that can get them to some victories. I have an upsetting Clemson at home. Obviously, you had Clemson going undefeated, so they're going to lose that game in your eyes. But that at Pitt, at Miami, and at SMU, I think they're going to take care of business at home because you can see there they only have 4 road games this year. So that could be a team that could surprise some people just because they have the advantage at home this year.
Yeah, I will say they have the toughest in conference schedule, Louisville. I don't think it's really a debate. You're going to Pitt, who's going to be decent, going to Virginia Tech, tough place to play, going to SMU, who was in the playoff last year, and then they have to play Clemson and Miami. So, yeah, I got done picking this team and they were 7-5, and I was like, I feel like they're better than that. But when you look at the schedule, it's I just don't see them winning any of those games in the red. They do have a joke of a non-conference schedule, though. This is a pretty laughable non-conference here. You got Eastern Kentucky, James Madison, Bowling Green, and Kentucky all at home. So that'll definitely make up for the ACC schedule, but not quite enough. I think they only win 7 games, unfortunately.
Then moving to the team that you probably expected us to put into the ACC championship, and we are. Now, I have them going perfect in the ACC, as you can see there from week 5 and on. They don't lose a game, but I think they stumble out of the gates because we really don't know what's going on with Carson Beck still to this day, and it's a week away. What's on? What's wrong with his arm? Is it perfectly fine? Who knows? So that's cause for concern for me. I definitely think they're going to lose to Notre Dame regardless. They should blow out Bethune Cook. And then I think that USF game, I think that could be a last second field goal USF upset because USF this year, I think, is one of those teams that could somehow surprise some people in the American Conference and end up 9-3, maybe even contend for that non-power four group of five conference bid at the end of the year. And I think they get their signature win in Miami. And how does Miami respond with a loss at home to Florida? But then after that, like I said, they run the table in the ACC to put themselves in prime position for an ACC championship against Clemson.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people are saying this team's going to take a step back after losing Cam Ward, who obviously saved them in a few games last year. But you got to remember that defense was awful last year, and I think they have done a lot to improve on that side of the ball. I think they dropped the Notre Dame game to start the season, but I think they rip off a bunch of wins. I initially had them 11-1, but that felt a little aggressive. So I think Virginia Tech late in the season. That feels like major upset potential there. We've seen a lot of highly ranked teams go into Blacksburg and get upset, so I think that could be a late season upset, but it won't be enough to keep them out of the ACC title because I think they'll still be 7-1 in conference, which will be enough to match up with Clemson.
Yeah, they moved to North Carolina and Bill Belichick. Obviously, he recruited well, top 30 class in your first ever year in the age 70 or older. in college football, and I think that's pretty solid in today's game. Now, is he going to move mountains and take this team to the playoff? It's possible with that schedule he has, but I don't think so. The hardest game, Clemson at home, obviously, we both have them losing that game. Then at Syracuse is his second hardest, and we both have them losing that game. But other than that, I really can see this team contending coming into the late weeks. But I think at Wake Forest, they're going to overlook it before that game against Duke because obviously we've seen it before. There's always teams out there that overlook the game before their huge rivalry game. And what's the word I'm looking for?
Trap game.
Yeah, trap game. Trap game. I think at Wake Forest is a trap game because you get Duke coming to your place. And unfortunately, you'll see why I have Wake Forest winning that game later. But maybe North Carolina can do this thing and shock the world because we've seen Belichick do it time and time again.
Yeah, I'm really high on North Carolina. And just going through their schedule, I did not expect to have them going 10-2. But very, very favorable schedule this year. I'm a little surprised they're underdogs against TCU at home. I think they do win that game. And then probably the bottom four or five teams in the ACC, they play all of them. You get Clemson sandwiched between two bye weeks at home. So if they're going to pull the upset, that's as good of an opportunity as you could have to do it. I think they dropped the game at Syracuse, but could definitely see them getting out of there with a win. So I think as long as, Bill Belichick is still the coach at the end of the season and it's not Jordan or somebody else, I think this team could make a run this year. And let's remember this is probably the greatest football coach of all time. So to think he's not going to be able to step in and win some football games, I think is doing him a disservice. So even if he's in his 70s, he still knows what he's doing. And I think they go 10-2 this year and shock a lot of people.
Now, the other team in North Carolina, a lot of red there. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. They're still going to hit their under, but it's not going to be too much good on the other side of the state here for NC State. They had their chance a few years ago when this team was 10-2 and kind of was a fluke year, but I think since then this team has kind of fallen back down to earth. I expect another 5-7 year uh, out of this NC State Wolfpack team.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about this team. Obviously, a lot of red on my part. I mean, if you just look at those last six games, it's really hard to find a win in there. And I think they had a little of an Iowa run there for a few years where they were kind of just 8-4, 9-3 every year, never better, never worse. I think all that momentum has kind of fallen off, and they will find themselves towards the bottom of the conference this year.
And then I think this could be in that Georgia Tech tier, NC North Carolina tier. Pitt, it could be that team interesting enough to win that game because those three at the end of the year is going to dictate their season. Now, obviously, I have them going 8-1 till week 11. And who knows? At home against Notre Dame, it's a cold weather game. I get Notre Dame plays in cold weather too, but sometimes you never know. At Georgia Tech, I think that's a tough loss for them. And then Miami at home. I mean, you and me talked about it before we started this thing. Miami traveling up to Pitt, Carson Beck traveling up to Pitt, end of the year, could be a playoff berth, ACC championship berth on the line. I might lean Pitt at the end of the year if that's the case.
We've seen that
Um,
before.
yeah, we've seen it before, so I wouldn't be too surprised if somehow they win that. But as of right now, I'm going with Pitt to finish 8-4 and just miss out on the ACC championship.
Yeah, the way it shakes out in my prediction here would be very unfortunate because last year they started 7-0 and finished 7-5. I have them starting 7-2 this year, but those last three games, I mean, I just can't find a win in there. Notre Dame and Miami, top 10 teams at home. I don't think they get either of those, and then going to Georgia Tech, who we both have going 9-3. So that's just a brutal finish to the schedule there. I'm just not completely sold on Pat Narduzzi either. A lot of returning starters, but just yeah, a lot of tough games. So I don't see him winning more than seven.
Yeah, and then another team in that tier that's right there, but isn't going to get there is SMU. I think last year not was a fluke run. They had a good team, but just the schedule was in their favor. And this year, it's not in their favor as much. 9-3, I think, is a very successful year coming off of what they did. Now, I have them losing early at home to Baylor. I think Baylor could go in there and surprise them and get a win. be a little shell shocked SMU would be coming out, but I think they can respond well, get a few wins there out of conference, then in conference. But at Clemson, I just can't see it. I just can't see it middle of the year. And then Miami at home, I think I could see them hanging around, but if we think the Miami team that, we've already projected to be, I just don't see SMU being there in the fourth quarter to compete. But I do have them finishing well at the end of the year and possibly on the outside looking in at a playoff berth.
Yeah, I don't think last year was a total fluke for SMU. I still think they have a lot of good pieces this year. Tough non-conference. You got Baylor at home at TCU. I think they dropped the TCU game on the road, and like Louisville, they have to match up with Clemson and Miami in conference play. I don't see them winning either of those. But outside of those, it's pretty favorable in the ACC. Uh, so if you could somehow pull one of those off, knock off Clemson or Miami, they could be back in the ACC title, but I just don't see it happening. So I think they go 9-3 this year, but that would still keep this program on the right track.
Yeah, and well, lots of red here. Stanford, though, they are beating Hawaii right now. So they got that going for them. I guess I picked Hawaii in the week zero video, and I'm still staying to it. This team's going 2-10. I don't care how they do it, but if you're over unders 3.5 wins in college football, yeah, I'm always taking the under because there's no way you're going to exceed expectations that much.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a long year for Stanford. Just no talent really returning and didn't really bring in anybody. They do have Frank Reich, which is kind of an interesting hire uh, for a program with an over-under of 3.5 wins. So that should be interesting. I did have them beating Hawaii, but I don't think they're going to have any success in the ACC other than upsetting Cal towards the end of the season. But yeah, not much to be said here. Maybe they could nip a couple upsets this year, get to 4 or 5 wins, and maybe build a little momentum. But it's going to be a rough first year here for Frank Reich.
Yeah, and as we're recording this, they're down one to Hawaii at half, so who knows how that's going to go. But a team that had a really good run last year. I think that's more in part to all the veteran guys they brought in for a 1 year thing. Now that's why you see they only have seven returning starters. But if there is any team that isn't a favorite to really control this conference, I think it could be Syracuse because, yeah, at Tennessee, it's a neutral site game. I mean, who knows with Tennessee this year? They're got a new quarterback, a lot of new players in there. Maybe they can win that game. Yeah, I think that's a coin flip. I know they're two touchdown underdogs, but you never know in week one in a neutral site. At Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame. Yeah, that's why I have them go
Yeah.
5-7. And that North Carolina game, I'm being generous. Obviously, I had to get a loss in there for North Carolina. Don't be surprised though if this team either somehow ends up 8-4 or 4-8. I really don't see them going 6-6 in the middle. I have them going 5-7 just for the benefit of the doubt, but it's gonna be one of those two. I feel like somehow, some way, they're gonna upset two teams and then get blown out to like Duke or like, I don't know. It's just this was probably the toughest team for me to pick this year because I liked what I saw last year, but unfortunately, they didn't return a lot from what we had last year.
I would say the good news for Syracuse, I have them going 6-0 at the Carrier Dome this year, so at least they could hang their hat on that. But I mean, the 6 road games you said, that's probably the most brutal road schedule maybe I've ever seen in college football. I mean, going to Tennessee, Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, all teams that are ranked, Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, all in the top 10. You get all of them on the road. So it's not even necessarily that I think they have the talent level of a 6-win team, but they definitely have the schedule of a 6-win team. They just didn't do themselves any favors there. It's hard to find more than 6 wins when that's your road schedule.
Yeah, and Virginia kind of in the same boat there. Um, Except they just don't have as many road games against good teams. But this team's just going to be bad this year. Nine returning starters, top 50 recruiting class, which I think is pretty good for Virginia if you compare it to years past, I believe. They've been kind of in the 60s, but they're starting to get a footing for themselves. Um, but I think they lose week one and week two, and then after that, it's kind of just ho hum. maybe we'll win this week. I don't know. If you lose to Coastal Carolina at home, I think that's all I'm gonna have to see for this team moving forward for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that Tony Elliott is still the coach at Virginia, and it feels like they've been very bottom of the conference every year under him. This year, I think they make a slight improvement. I almost had them upsetting Virginia Tech at home to end the season, which would put them in a bowl game, which for them would be a huge deal with how the program has been as of late. I just don't think they can quite get it done. Will 5-7 be enough to keep Elliott for another year? I'm not sure, but I don't think this team is in a place as of right now to make a bowl game.
And moving to Virginia Tech, I know you're a little higher on them than I am. At South Carolina, and that's a loss. Vandy at home, I think that's a coin flip. I'm gonna go Vandy's way, just because what I've seen last year and what Vandy can do against better teams. Giving them credit where credit is due heading into this year. Now, I think they do rip off four in a row there, but at Georgia Tech, that's tough. And then you get Louisville, Florida State, Miami in your last three out of four. I just can't see it. But don't get me wrong, they're another team like Syracuse. Like all these teams are just jumbled together besides Clemson and Miami at one and two. Then you have three through, I would say, seven or eight that I think could all finish 9-3, 8-4, or 6-6. And Virginia Tech's just one of those teams for me. Just because, as you can see, there are only five returning starters. There's a little cause for concern there for me.
Yeah, I guess I have Virginia Tech as my surprise team, coming out with a 9-3 record. I just feel like this team's been, hovering around mediocrity ever since Frank Beamer left and has been waiting for their breakthrough. So maybe this is the year. I do think they have a pretty favorable schedule aside from having to match up with South Carolina week one, which I do have them losing. But I ended up backtracking and having them pull an upset over Miami there in the second to last week. I just feel like Miami typically loses one of those games late, and Virginia Tech is a really tough place to play. So I have them pulling that upset and then going to Virginia and winning that rivalry game. And just the way it shakes out, I have them 9-3. Pretty favorable ACC schedule. And yeah, I think Virginia Tech, a 9-3 record this year with only five returning starters, could be huge for them moving forward because it feels like they've been a bit of a sleeping giant in this conference lately.
And then at last, your Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Both of us have them going 4-8. And then I have them upsetting North Carolina and then going on the road at the end of the year to beat Duke because there's no way that this team goes 2-10. I know your over under is 4.5, but they should easily start the season 2-0 easily. I hope because if you don't, then they might go 1-11 and be the new Kent State, or Purdue, I guess you could say. But brutal schedule on the road, for that 4 week period at or 5 week period at Georgia Tech, at Virginia Tech, at Oregon State, which is all the way across the country. Then you get a bye to recover, and then SMU at home at FSU. I mean, it's a tough stretch right there. And I even have them losing to Delaware at home. They're out of conference game because I think Delaware could be a sneaky 6-6 team in their first year in the FBS. But not much to report here on Wake Forest. They were the worst in conference for recruiting wise as well. So, that's what you get when you are normally bottom of the barrel after Sam Hartman's departure.
Yeah, pretty weak non-conference schedule too, I will say. I think they're maybe the only team in FBS that has four non-conference games and none of them are against a Power Four team. They do go to Oregon State though. I guess I'll give them a little credit there, which will be a loss, unfortunately. This team they lost too much. Dave Clawson actually had this program punching above its weight for a while. Now he's gone, so I just think it's gonna be a long year for Wake Forest, and they'll find themselves towards the bottom of the conference.
And that's going to be it for our ACC preseason preview. Check back at our other videos as well as we'll be breaking down the other Power Four conferences and our bracket previews and what we predict is going to happen at the end of the year. But until the next video, Bench Buddies are out.